welcome all of you to this webinar on digital transformation in management, institutions, challenges and opportunities. I am Paushali Chatterjee. I look after the Development Center of TCS ION. As part of this Development Center offering, we help corporates and government institutions with learning consulting, platform learning content and learning services. So, as we all know that digital transformation is dramatically reshaping the industry, and most of the organizations are pursuing large-scale change efforts to take advantage of these trends to compete and stay relevant in the market. In this webinar, we will cover the challenges faced by institutes during transformation of processes in their institute, ranging from changing the mindset of their staff, adapting to new technologies, managing the shift from offline to online with all stakeholders, opportunities uncovered due to digitization of processes, the benefits leveraged, and the future roadmap. In this session, we are very happy to have two very distinguished experts to understand digital transformation in management, challenges, and future potential opportunities. So first, it's my pleasure and honor to welcome and introduce our guest speakers. First, Dr. Himanshu Rai, who is the director of IIM Indore. Under his leadership, IIM Indore got the Triple Crown accreditation of AMBA, AACSB, and EKIS, making it one of the 90-odd institutions in the world to have this honor. He has been the Dean of SDA Bocconi, India campus, professor at SDA Bocconi, Milan, and has taught at IIM Lucknow and XLRI. He is an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad and KREC Surathkal. Dr. Himanshu provides strategic consultancy to the Government of India and has audited programs sponsored by the Planning Commission of India. A very big welcome to you, Dr. Rai. Next, I welcome Dr. Ramesh Bhatt. Dr. Bhat is the Provost of Management Education and Dean of the School of Business Management, NMIMS. He's an alumnus of Harvard School of Public Health and the University of Delhi and has 38 years of experience in research and teaching corporate finance and health finance at IIM Ahmedabad, University of North Carolina, at Chapel Hill, India program, IIM Udaipur, IMI New Delhi, NMIMS Mumbai, Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, and Shriram College of Commerce. His full-time consulting assignments include working with ABT Associates India, DFID India, the Royal Netherlands Embassy India. A very big welcome to you, Dr. Bhat. So first I'll come to Dr. Rai with the first question of this webinar. So Dr. Rai, can you please share your experiences on the challenges faced during the transformation of processes in your institution, ranging from changing the mindset of the staff to adapting to the new technologies? Dr. Rai.
So thank you, Paushali, for that introduction. And, when I still remember that blessed day when we decided to shut the campus and ask the students to return home. And we were in a very peculiar situation because we were in the midst of an examination for one of our programs. And unlike other IIMs and other institutions, we also happen to have an integrated program in management, which is a 5-year program. And therefore, we had the first 3 years of the undergraduate students in different stages of their coursework. So the programs were still on. And therefore, we were in a peculiar situation because A, we had to conduct exams as soon as we asked the students to leave, and B, we had to figure out as to how do we continue with the classes of these 3 years. The other programs were more or less over. We have 7 flagship programs at IIM Indore. And therefore, for us, the challenges were twofold. One was the challenge of the infrastructure. Because we have an experience, IIM Indore has an experience of having completely online executive programs, and therefore we did have some dedicated classrooms, we did have some dedicated studios, but we did not have the bandwidth to begin with to actually have the classrooms for everyone. However, within a week, we managed to get most of the classes online. But I think the biggest challenge for us was that everything had to be stacked up. We did not have a coherent digital strategy. So in terms of infrastructure, We first got a couple of equipments and then we realized, okay, this is not going to work and therefore we need to stack up with something else. So in a very stacking up manner, we managed to get the equipment at the end of the day, but these were only the infrastructure challenges. Second, as you said, Paushali, there were these mindset problems. The first problem, the first challenge that we faced was at our end, and this was for the simple reason that all of us, in fact, all of my faculty colleagues, all the officers and the staff of the institute, we thought that this was a mere blip. We thought that this was a situation which is going to be there for possibly a month or so, and then the world will continue to be as it has always used to be. We never realized that we were in this for a very long haul. And therefore, for example, to conduct examinations online, and the first suggestion that came was, why are we even trying to go there? Let's wait for some time and things are going to be fine. And when the students come back, they can give the exams possibly 3 months later, so on and so forth. But then there was a sense of premonition amongst the top leadership, and we realized that no, we'll have to do something. And therefore, we very quickly started onboarding the faculty members to switch on to the online board. We started looking for partners with whom we can actually line up to conduct the online exams. And at the same time, we also started looking for partners with which we can actually develop some kind of a learning management system which could be adapted to the stuff that we want. Because our requirements, as I said, we have 7 flagship programs, and in particular, our 5-year flagship program, the integrated program in management, has a completely different kind of a schedule that we follow, a different kind of a calendar that we follow, and very different kind of courses that we follow. I think the mindset problem, one, from the faculty side was that do we really need to go online? That was number one. Number two was a pedagogical issue. Because a lot of people who did not have prior experience of teaching online assume that online teaching was simply sitting in front of a computer or standing in front of a camera and doing a class exactly like what you would do in a classroom, which is not the case, because online teaching is a completely different pedagogy. And therefore, subsequently, the big challenge was, what were those elements, what were those courses that actually presented themselves to online teaching? What are those courses which we could hold back? Because also there is some kind of a logical sequence. Only after you have finished a certain set of courses could you move on to the next set of courses. And while maintaining that logical sequence, what are those courses which were not conducive to online teaching, and how could we push, and how far could we push them so far as online teaching was concerned? This was one. The second was, and this turned out to be a far bigger challenge, and I think that is where all of us academics had lessons to learn. And that is, while we had the wherewithal at our end, while we managed to spruce up the infrastructure, while we managed to very quickly address the mindset issues of the faculty and provide them with the best of training that we possibly could, what we did not actually account for was the problem that the participants would face. So we had assumed that if everything was hunky-dory at our end, so would it be at the participants' end. But those were the lessons and those were the challenges which got thrown in pretty early, because we realized that some students lived in areas where you had just 2G, let alone a Wi-Fi, let alone a 3G or a 4G. We had students who lived in families where they had to share the equipment, and you couldn't go out and buy the equipment because Corona by that time had taken a very, very dangerous turn, and obviously people did not want to step down. And then there were those areas, those were containment areas where you were not allowed to step out. So that was part two. And the third was, once again, we had assumed that nobody would have those problems like electricity problems, etc. But we know what the situation in the countries, and particularly in some states, those problems are huge. And therefore, that was a second set of challenges that we faced. And those were the challenges at the end of the participants. And the third set of challenges that we faced, Paushali, were after we had had experience of about 5 to 6 months, and that was the fatigue. It was a fatigue that was associated with long exposure to the screen. It was a fatigue that was that students were exposed to because of mental health issues, because their diet were all over, their sleeping patterns were all over, the eyes were getting impacted, so on and so forth. And therefore, we had to develop SOPs, not merely to ensure that we had the systems in place, but also about how people ought to behave. And along that particular journey, there were many, many lessons that we learned. But suffice to say right now that we face challenges predominantly on the infrastructure and on the mindset. On the mindset side, and the infrastructure side, the challenges at the participants' ends were far more acute than those at the end of the institution. Back to you, Paushali.
I think those are extremely interesting insights, Dr. Rai. And I think the last point about fatigue, all of us know about that because we are all in front of screens. And I've personally faced both the sides. My daughter was actually in her third year college, so her exams were stalled. So we were wondering what's going to happen. And I, on the other side, as part of the TCS academic program, I'm taking a design thinking program online. So you can imagine that, trying to engage students in a design thinking program online where I can't see them was a challenge. So I can completely, it resonates with me very highly. So I'll come to you, Dr. Bhat. What were some of the challenges in managing all the stakeholders in your institute? If you can throw some light on that.
Yeah, thank you, Paushali. See, it was in the month of actually when the virus started spreading across the country, and every day when starting the signals from the students and their parents worrying about the safety of this. I think the most important priority at that time was to ensure the safety of all the students. Second was the ensuring the continuity of our programs, because we that it is going to usually disrupt our academic activities and all that we're doing. By the middle of March, I think the government guidelines came and we had to put on the institution. And point in of course that the safety of the and safety of the staff became very important for us, because we have a kind of closed campus, and we immediately started taking steps to ensure the staggering delays and on coming to the office, and immediately shifting to the online, as mentioned, that the kind of an immediately started happening. So I think the help and the support at the same time, I think our NPH in the process of getting our internship placements month, and the final placement already happened. The students supposed to complete their exam and then join their duties. So the support from the recruiters and various companies, and every day we used to have the discussions with all key stakeholders, particular external key stakeholders, the kind of steps and processes we have. I think was from the very beginning that this pandemic was, I think, so different, so unique. We had no clue that how we are going to handle the situation. There was no rule book kind of thing that we need to do something in this kind of situation. So therefore, at that point, I think it was put all our internal stakeholders together and look at the kind of possibilities and options available to us. We make sure that the continuity of our programs does not be impacted. So with the support from both external stakeholders and internal stakeholders, which was very critical for us to have a strong and disruption-proof learning ecosystem, the way we are to move from the physical classrooms to the virtual classrooms. I'll just illustrate a little bit complexity case holders who were in this process. We have the academic office, which manages all the programs, and therefore completing the on curriculum. Not yet started the exams, but they most of our courses were towards the end of the completion of. So completing that existing ongoing curriculum was a very initial task, and the examination had to carry out the examination of placement officers to organize the preparation of the sending them for the internship programs, and admission office has to really begin the admission process of the student, and the this could not have been possible with the support from the IT department, which was going to provide us and help us to explore the various technology options how to manage. It was not going to be possible without the support from the learning courses or hybrid system. Make sure that all our learning courses are available to the students. It was not possible without the support from the marketing department to ensure that our students, parents, organizations, companies are done with some kind of our alumni role as a state was very critical in helping our students to make those choices at this point in time, because we still have some kind of input from some companies not to honor the commitment which they had done, and also I think ensuring a summer internship camp student goes well. Constant interaction with the recruiters, because recruiters were always in the mind that they should start our internship placement right now or the later point. Engagement of the different departments in the school, it was very important. We all work in some kind of a coherent strategy for the work which we started doing is not hampered. The just at the onset of this pandemic, particularly we closed down the school, transitioning from the physical classroom to the virtual classroom. Was one very big step for all of us, actually, for all the academia globally. I think it has been a major step. I remember that many of us had not heard about the WebEx, Zoom, or Microsoft things. We had to suddenly shift to these platforms to make sure that we ensure delivery with same effectiveness as between physical classrooms. We realized in the very beginning that this transition was not very easy. Because we experienced that there is a significant loss and the transition to the virtual classrooms. And this loss is in terms of the ability to engage this. So, the ensuring that there is a learning ecosystem which helps them to discuss, collaborate with each other. One very important thing which we found that helped us, loss was very important, which helped us to develop the key strategies, and I think getting to the various forms to understand that how some of the learning pedagogies be certain sessions in the classroom because we follow most of the time the case can be done online. This helped us to focus on the pedagogical principles that and teaching practices at business schools and how best to apply them in those classroom sessions. Same, I think, challenge was how do we remain student-centric, as I think Himanshu mentioned that when you come to the online classroom, you think that this is something you can stand to be computer and computer is something or device and it will relay my session. Share of the screen and the people can see me PowerPoint presentation. But I think the student-centric is a very important concept which really address some of the issues and make sure that our strategy focused on active learning, which in fact at a later point in time I would discuss a little bit in detail and look at this ecosystem in terms of the synchronous part of the learning and asynchronous part of the learning, where the students engage with learning on their own before after the course was become asynchronous part. That becomes important, I think, understanding in the that you have to go online, you have to really create a good mix of synchronous and asynchronous learning in the and this in fact helps go towards so initial students because we have completed the courses, we completed all the courses with sessions, but fortunately we had the summer vacation day and we utilized that day very effectively in our faculty on these various tools and techniques and the toolkit which is really available for WebEx or Zoom to make sure that you are able to do course very effectively with complete student-centric kind of a thing. The examination, I think, was a stakeholder where we had to complete a lot of examination processes. Went through the online examination were something in form of the open exams and more case-based problems to the students which involve developing. The exams were not rote-based learning and things like because in unproctored manner online and the students submit and assign so long thing process the dashboard system to ensure that answers are not tampered at. So we use all the concepts of the blockchain kind of thing in the process of carrying out admission. Admission were supposed to also admissions of the entire be completed, but as a university we had to go to the undergraduate admissions and we this time entered artificial intelligence and machine learning based kind of an examination test of the students. We were about 25,000 students in the undergraduate and we successfully completed that and we are proud and we're happy about that. I think it was really fascinating journey looking at the way and the way distributive leadership of all the stakeholders tried to find out the solutions to the various challenges which we were facing, actively ensured the continuity of our programs and students and keeps on.
Okay, thanks, Dr. It was really interesting. And I think you made a great point about how it was a real collaboration between so many stakeholders to make this huge change possible? Because as certain reports are saying that changes that were taking years earlier was now done in weeks. So whatever you talked about, the admissions, etc., and I'm very interested to actually hear about those pedagogies and how you manage to ensure engagement as well as the exams. Time permitting, we'll talk about that. But in the interest of time, I'll just move ahead. So, Dr. Rai, I had a question for you on the transformation process and what was targeted first, but I think you've already answered that. So I will go to the next question, which is that digital transformation requires organizational change, right? Whether it is at an institute or at a corporate. So how did you manage to, how did you manage employee expectations, or in terms of, employee training? I think you touched upon the fact that the professors had to get used to taking classes online, so that it was a learning process for them. So what about their expectations, their training, etc.? So what kind of organizational change did you have to do?
I concede, but then we didn't have a choice at that point of time, because we had absolutely no idea what was going to hit us, and therefore we were learning on the fly. We were learning as we moved ahead. And like Dr. Bhat pointed out, the problems were not merely related to academics. We had multiple issues, because IIM Indore also has this big 193-acre campus, and we had to take care of the campus, because despite the fact that we sent most of the students back, there were still about 80 students who had stayed back, were our doctoral students for whom this happens to be home. And there was another bunch of students who did not have a home to go back to at that point of time because of multiple reasons. So they stayed back then, plus we had 150 families who were staying on the campus. And therefore, again, if I have to put them into buckets, so there was one problem which was academic, that we had to take care of. Number one, starting the classes. Number two, completing the exams which were remaining. The second issue that we had was that we had not completed our admission process so far as our postgraduate program was concerned. The interviews were still left. And therefore, we had to figure out a way to conduct the interviews for the admission to our PGP. Number three, we also had to conduct the admission test for our IPM program, the Integrated Program in Management. And therefore, we were working with our partner, which incidentally happens to be TCS. And we were working with our partner to figure out as to how do we conduct that exam. And that was on the computer exam. We never ever thought that we would do an online test, because to me, I know that online tests, there are lots of leakages, and therefore it couldn't have been fair, irrespective of how much we tried, because almost 20,000 students write that particular IPM admission test. So that was the third part. And the fourth piece of the puzzle was that we also had to, while at IIM, at most of the IIMs, at least in IIM Indore, the placement activities are driven by the students, but the institute plays the role of an enabler. And therefore, the deferment of the summer internships, the deferment of the final placements, and therefore we needed to have somebody over here taking care of these things. And to do all of these things, we did not have the required staff, because I had only 10% of my staff inside, the support staff. And it is then that you realize the value of each and every person when you don't have that person. When you realize that just because your housekeeping staff is not there, there are too many problems that you're facing. You have, the classes are dirty, the corridors are dirty, and you need somebody to take care of them. The plants, we have an extremely green campus. The plants are dying, and therefore you have to kind of, do something about it. And therefore, we did multiple things. One was that very early, I created WhatsApp groups. So, we don't like WhatsApp groups. I don't like most of the WhatsApp groups because of the kind of messages that I keep getting, particularly the good morning and good evening and good night ones. But we created WhatsApp groups. So there was a leadership group, which had all my deans in it. There was an administration group, which had my chief administrative officer, the hostel chair, so on and so forth. We had a programs group. And then we had a group which was taking care of the other issues. So by actually communicating, I think the key was communication. We communicated with each other, we communicated with the internal stakeholders, we communicated with the external stakeholders. And at the same time, we tried to learn from the best practices that the other schools around the world were actually implementing, facing their problems, their challenges, and what did they do. And simultaneously, all the IIM directors were also talking to each other. So this is one time, and if I have to talk about one good thing that happened, and that was this collaborative spirit, not just between institutions outside of the country, because that is something which has always been there. We We have signed MOUs with institutions outside the country, but here we were also looking at institutions within the country and then trying to learn from each other. And that was the approach, therefore, we took. So when it came to infrastructure, for example, we started looking at how can we stack up the infrastructure to give the best possible experience to our participants. And there were some very small things, Paushali. So, for example, we have the camera. For example, to do this, what TCS did was sent us a big SOP saying that this is how the camera should be. It should get that level, this level. You should have light. You should have light falling on you, so on and so forth. We didn't know any of this in April, early April this year. We didn't know any of this. So, for example, when we got the camera, the first thing we realized was that, hey, it's a weird kind of thing that the participants get to see. And therefore, then through trial and error, we realized that if you put the camera at the eye level, that is how things work. And then we realized that the lighting in the classroom was not sufficient for an online mode because the faculty space was not visible. Third, we realized that possibly the range of the camera was not enough to actually for the faculty to use the blackboard because they also wanted to use the blackboard simultaneously. Fourth, when the faculty wanted to write something on the PPT, annotation, the annotation was not possible on a desktop, so we had to buy another big screen, which actually facilitated the faculty to use annotation on the big screen. So we learned. We learned slowly, but we learned steadily, and we also kept exchanging all of these learnings with other institutions, both in the country and abroad, so that we could in turn learn from them. The second thing what we did was we started looking for partnerships. How can we actually create partners, new partners, and how can we work with those partners for a long-term solution? So we managed to have AI proctored exams very early during the day. And of course, there were some teething problems, but we managed to sort out those teething problems. We managed to address those teething problems, and we managed to have a almost foolproof. I mean, nothing can be 100% foolproof, but almost a foolproof solution in place. And the third thing, which I'm extremely proud of, is that I called upon the community to actually come and help me. And not just did the community come in terms of, for example, there were some superstars that I had who were very, very good in teaching online because they had done a lot of online training programs. So they immediately started taking classes for the other faculty members who were not so comfortable standing in front of the camera, sharing tips, sharing their experiences, etc., etc. Simultaneously, we also had a committee which was looking at restructuring the courses itself. How can the courses be restructured to suit this particular pedagogy? What are the cases that need to be brought in? What are those elements which need to be taken out, perhaps? And also, how should the assessment be changed so as to match this, as also address the issues of convenience as well as safety of the students, which means that students should not have too much of a screen time. Because if you even add assessments, if you start taking surprise quizzes, etc., which one would normally do, and which is something that IIMs are known for, that perhaps adds a little bit to the stress that the students are going through. And since everybody was living in the same place, that stress also trickled on to the parents. And therefore, once in a while, we had the parents communicating with us. So fortunately, as I said, we learned our lessons, we collaborated, and I think the level of trust that we had on our partners, be it our partners for conducting the exam, be it our partners who were providing us with the LMS, and be it our partners abroad from whom we were learning. Just to give you an example, and I'll go back to you with this. For example, I attended a conference of the deans, and one of the things that came out was that the acceptance of the transition from the offline, or rather the in-class to the online mode, in terms of percentage, was higher for the faculty as compared to the students. Now, you would think otherwise. You would think that students being of a younger generation would perhaps be more amenable to a transition to online. But then, as I said, I pointed out the problems. We had all the access and the resources to do things at our end in terms of infrastructure. The students did not. And I think part of the hesitation came from there. So those were the important lessons that we learned very early. And we started looking at ways to address those problems. Back to you, Paushali.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Interesting points. So LOTG, of course. And I sense a bit of, working agile also, that, okay, you address this piece and then take up another piece and work with it. And also, I think in both of what both you and Dr. Bhat said, I see another point coming out, which is in much discussion these days, which is empathy. empathy not only for the students, the faculty, as well as the fact that we take people for granted, and when they're not there, we realize that what kind of value and contribution they have. So that was very insightful, and of course the collaboration. I think that is also something that is a good outcome of this whole situation that we are in. So, Dr. Bhatt, I'll go to you with the same question very briefly in the interest of time. That in terms of organizational change and managing motivation, expectation of your organization, what are some of the things that you had to
I could not hear your question properly, but
can I say that there is some problem because I was getting muted? Same question that I asked Dr. Bhatt.
Yeah. I'll just
Yeah.
I think when we look at the question which was there, how we change this digital transformation by its very nature involves organizational change actually. How did we manage change kind of thing? It was in fact we were forced into this kind of situation. There's no kind of a deliberate plan to transform the organization. It was not a transformation of which new technology model and we had to adopt it after careful thought. We were just pushed into this kind of situation that okay, physical is on and virtual is on, so how guys can manage. It was simply that kind of situation. Suddenly, it was somebody put this on and off, physical off and online on. So situation kind of a thing. Now, I think instead of looking at the very complex efforts of the we say that we would plan some kind of transformation, it would have very well thought through strategy, maybe a couple of them a great plan to really to move in this kind of a thing. But we didn't have any option then to research. So it was mostly what I will say doing well actually. Kind of a situation we were in. And it was not something you after strategy for the digital transformation and you were planning into your organization for change. Most of the time, I think it was a little bit of a mindset, also the capability. I think there's another thing which we talk about in the change the culture of the organization, which is something very difficult about it. But I think we just started to focus on that. We have to really bring everybody on board in digital initiatives. I think we will need a little bit of the perspectives and change the capabilities. Here we started focusing on the initial. And what do we mean by focusing on these concepts and capabilities? I think it was probably in the initial stages based on the exploring, trying and experimentation. Primarily, every group of faculty will sit down and said, okay, what are the forms available to us? We will allocate the responsibility to 3-4 different groups. Okay, you Zoom, try Webex, and we will try Microsoft Teams and Google Meets, and there was a few other platforms at that point in time. By evening, we will come back and the console of each of them. So it was really kind of an pure exploration, trying, experimenting, really learning to figure out that how we leverage these technologies to really get the things which we need actually in the classroom situation and what will suit for the classroom kind of thing. So important part of that was that while we were doing all this, obviously we later on presentation and a lot of training because we brought some experts who were well versed in these technologies from Bangalore and in ISB. They've gone through a great training program on the virtual learning and full day with him, helping to understand what are different dimensions of this virtual learning. And that's where I put in a lot of effort, almost I think 30 to 35 hours of it was done with faculty, so they to know this technology and start thinking about it, using this classroom kind of a thing. Helping them to understand all the toolkit, those technologies. When we look at chat, you can breakout rooms, you can use the screen sharing process, you can also use a lot of other tools which are available in the Zoom to strengthen your session. And later on, we had also the experts coming us telling us that a lot of collaborative frameworks like and collaborative frameworks in our case discussions and have now used them very effectively for group situations. But I think so on the one hand, we were trying to make sure that all the technologies which we use help us deliver the classrooms and classroom sessions in a very effective manner. But at the same time, there were several academic processes here. Like we are also a accredited school. We have the assurance learning system. So how do we transform our assurance learning system in context of the digital? When it was physical classroom situation, we had to transition to the health system. We are going to be this is the one ensuring the learning, quality of learning in the MBA program. Make sure that all of our plans, all of us are a compliant kind of thing, which requires some work. At the same time, I think understood that the courses have to put in the students and ethics. It led to a lot of outlines. There are other courses which were for the classroom. So we had to change them in the digital context and bring explicit reference to the what is synchronous component and what is synchronous component. And I think just to extend to the engagement of the students and the quality of our programs. We carried out a lot of peer support programs. Like we created a peer group of faculty members and mock classes on the platforms to understand that how does it safely give some talks to their session here. So we go to the students and not addressing them. We just wanted to test out that how does it work out on the website and if anything to learn from students started incorporating them. So I think they are the kind of things which us to understand. We also figured towards the when we were 3 months into the process that this virtual classroom method, as I mentioned in my previous discussion, that there is a loss when you transition from classroom to the virtual classroom. So how does one address that loss in the process, and what are kind of changes we need to bring in the virtual classroom sessions to make sure that loss is minimized? Of course, we cannot completely replace virtual classrooms, we cannot completely replace physical classrooms, which were, there are a number of things there. But we try to see that how does one improve the methods of engagement, how does one reduce these variables to ensure that students have kind of an ownership in the learning process. Also started looking at some of the behavioral aspects in creating. So we in fact developed some kind of toolkit for the kind of analysis one needs to use in the virtual classrooms kind of thing, which I think later on collectively put together, and it also got published in the magazines. That if you have to, because there are a whole lot of behavioral barriers, particularly in the virtual classroom sections, it may not allow full participation from the students. One, I think, at the duration itself, actually, and how to break that section into a few smaller sections so that the student remains engaged in the process. We also make sure that from the very beginning we build feedback mechanism and ensure that after every session, particularly in the initial stages, there is some feedback thing which we can improve upon it. So we had a very important part at our assessing that whether we are doing the right thing and it is received well by the students. We also developed a system of making the anchors for courses who will take lead in terms of designing the course outline and in terms of that this synchronous components have to be understand in what way they have to be distributed to the students. And I think at the same time, the other challenge before us at that time was particularly the big that moving to these very high level platforms like Rooms, it required a lot of technology upgrades also, because I think some systems with the lower speed, they will not work actually. So we started putting a lot of emphasis on the new systems, upgrading the systems, and in some cases the software upgrades of the computers. So these are some of the ways in which we try to make sure that doing digital becomes efficient, effective. I think what Himanshu said, doing by experiencing it was something like that, digital. But I think being digital is for the future, and for that we have started that what are the strategies that being digital. So being digital is fine, doing it somehow. But being digital, I think that is what you mentioned, digital transformation, and what does it involve. So maybe next phase would be thinking about this, that transformation, and getting to institutions to be digital in a manner.
Thank you, Dr. Bhat. So this doing digital rather than going digital, and then finally how do we continue being digital is what you're talking about. So I'll go on to the next question, which is for Dr. Rai. What according to you has been the most successful initiative, and if time permits, if you can tell us about one benefit that has come out of it. You've already talked about collaboration, but if there's any other benefit you want.
So, first of all, if I were to talk about some of those stories, which to me were the silver lining on the proverbial dark cloud. One was this, that we managed to actually figure out the AI proctored online exam. And why do I say that we managed to figure it out? Because we actually tested it. We actually tested that online exam, and we tested it that with people who were living in far-flung areas. So even in the remote areas, for example, in Jammu and Kashmir, where they had only 2G network, that particular AI proctored exam actually worked. And therefore, that was one very interesting piece of this entire digital story, that we managed to create something which required very less bandwidth so far as the end of the participants was concerned. The second thing, as I've been talking about collaboration, and to me, collaboration has been the biggest discovery so far as our tryst with this pandemic, particularly in terms of digitization is concerned. So a lot of my students had not taken their textbooks with them. And then, of course, when we started with the new programs, the new students also did not have the textbooks. So we actually worked with a lot of publishing houses and they converted some of those textbooks into ebooks. And the fact that we could manage to do that, I think, was once again a very heartening thing that we saw. So I would say that this was another beautiful success story. And the third part is that, in times of pandemic, suddenly there are some things which come out which we had not otherwise envisaged. So Indore prides itself to have an infrastructure which is very, very conducive to my differently abled participants. But when the time of the pandemic came, we suddenly realized that we were falling short of those expectations because there were some people who needed, say, the hard copies because they could not do with the ebook or the audiobook, etc., etc. And therefore, that challenge, how to address that challenge, which we managed to do so successfully by talking to each and every individual. So you'll be amazed. I'm amazed at what my faculty did. All my program chairs, they have actually called up each and every student. And I'm not talking about talking to them in groups of, say, 50 or 60. I'm talking about a phone call being made to every individual to find out what their problems were, collating those problems, and then brainstorming at this end to actually address those problems. And even though some of those meetings, I was telling about those WhatsApp groups that we made, some of those meetings used to last till midnight or sometimes way past midnight. I think in the hindsight and looking back, when I look back at them, those were very, very enjoyable because we came together as a community and did something which enhanced and actually helped us in putting that digital process in place. And finally, the last story, which has got nothing to do with digitization. I told you initially that we had only 10% of the support staff. So when I called upon my faculty, I called upon my community, the entire community came together. So what the community used to do was that on every Sunday, the community used to take charge of everything. So I would have faculty, their spouses, staff, their family, their children who would come, and there would be a Google sheet which was prepared that so-and-so was interested in taking up the role of the security person. So they would do security jobs. They would look after gardening. So there would actually be community members who were doing gardening, watering the plants, etc. We have a dog shelter where we shelter all the dogs, not just from the campus, but also wounded dogs or abandoned dogs from outside. So there were community members who were taking care of the dog shelter. There were community members who were taking care of cleaning and serving in the mess. And there were community members who joined me because I picked up the last piece of this particular service, and that was the sweeping and mopping of the academic block of the classrooms, etc. So this, to me, in this entire digital discourse, was the most beautiful story that came out of the entire community coming together and doing things way beyond what their job responsibility or job profile demanded. And the final question, going ahead, what have we really learned and what have we really achieved? Now, going forward, I think we are going to offer a lot many more programs, both in terms of academic programs as well as executive programs, and both in terms of asynchronous mode as well as synchronous mode that Dr. Bhat spoke about, because now we are far more comfortable so far as technology is concerned, so far as use of technology is concerned. And some of my faculty is really excited about this because they have realized that through this medium also they can reach out to a lot of people and do a lot of good work. So that to me is one thing going forward. The second thing going forward, which I have to do and make sure that my top leadership team sits together and we do it, and that is to create a coherent digital strategy rather than that learning on the go model, which I had created in the early times of COVID. So that is going to be the second thing going forward. And the third and the most important thing that I would like to highlight is that what we learned from this pandemic was compassion. So you spoke about empathy. I'll go a step forward, a step ahead and say compassion is what we learned about. Because, compassion is when not only do you empathize with what the other person is going through, but you also do something to mitigate the suffering and the circumstances of the other person so that you can actually help the other person. And to me, this was a great realization. As I said, the very fact that we figured out that the problem, we had to address the problem at the end of the participants. And not just that, just a week back, we had a dean's meeting and there were about 51 deans across the country, across the world. And we were talking about some of the things, and one of the deans from Brazil, he pointed out a very interesting thing. Now, when you're teaching online, and I think a lot of my fellow academics would agree, one of the bigger challenges that we face is that students don't put their videos on. And therefore, many a times, you don't really realize. And it's the same of participants, even in an executive program mode. And you don't realize when the person is really there, paying attention or not. And we assume that it's a question of indiscipline. We assume it's a case where the other person is doing it for reasons which are not good. Here was an eye-opener which came from the dean of one of the business schools in Brazil. He said they actually interviewed a lot of students, and what they found out was that a lot of students or participants did not show their videos simply because they were embarrassed about the place that they lived in. Now, this to me, once again, is a lesson, because we assume things. We go with our assumptions, we go with our preconceived notions. Of course, somebody can say that, hey, why not create a virtual screen, so on and so forth. But a virtual screen is, even for the virtual screen to work, you need to have some kind of an equipment. You need to put a cloth behind you. Otherwise, a virtual screen, you will have your head floating or some such thing. And therefore, these learnings were the learnings which actually accelerated the process of us trying to understand the other stakeholders better, to have a compassionate attitude. So, for example, we managed to convince our faculty colleagues that not only do we need to deliver online lessons, we also need to perhaps record all of those online lessons and allow the students to look at those online lessons for a while. And initially, the faculty was a little hesitant about it because they said, what if people put it up on the YouTube? What if people share it to the social media, so on and so forth? So there was this very delicate balance. But I think at the end of the day, the balance tilted towards being compassionate. So these were my lessons for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. I have a hard stop. So thank you very much. Collaboration and compassion are the two big takeaways, and I can't agree with you more. Thank you very much for your insights today. And,
thank you so much. Dr. Bhat, sorry for leaving, but I have to.
Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.
Talking to you. So the same last two questions just clubbed together. So what has been the most successful digital initiative in your institute, and what has been a benefit from this digital transformation that you've gone through? One of the biggest things. You can highlight that.
Yeah, so I think I would like to rephrase this. I will say that doing digital initiatives actually, because I think it was an exploratory phase where we were trying to experiment with a whole lot of new things, and therefore there was not one coherent thought through digital initiative, but I think a series of experiments which we started working at, which started the selection of the platforms, like which particular platform is appropriate for us. And we figured out that I think the different platforms have the different features, and they address the different needs, and they are different actually. And therefore, we spent some time in looking at that, what is best for us in terms of which will give us the better student learning experience, and we zeroed on something. But I think the initiatives like introducing the collaborative platforms, actually, I don't know, I have not seen many schools using the collaborative frameworks actually, which are like, say, Mindtree, and where you can do kind of an collaborative work actually. So that was one of the initiatives, I think, which we also looked at. I think within the platforms which we looked at, use of the breakout rooms in the class discussions, frequent use of polls to ensure the class remains engaged, and also introduction of the writing pad. So you write something on the writing pad, the students can see on the screen, was, I think, another interesting doing digital initiative in the process of the thing. I think the focus on the synchronous, asynchronous, what I mentioned was particularly, I think, multimedia learning material which can be used in the asynchronous mode in the classroom situations was something very interesting initiative. Hash code concept for the online examinations, I feel very happy. It helped us to ensure the examinations get completed without tampering the records, kind of a thing, and with complete privacy. I think the other benefits and I think whole lot of opportunities which were uncovered because of the this use was like one course where as a course on international business, where the faculty could invite the 7-8 experts from the different countries during the course. Like say, she invited the resource persons from Japan, Jakarta, Singapore, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India. In the one course, I think it was a very fascinating experience that we leveraged the technology to bring a lot of connect of the relevant connect in the classroom kind of a situations while the class is on. What are the benefits which we got from this whole process? Whatever digital initiatives which we took, doing digitally those initiatives. I think one very important thing is that it ensured the continuity of the university academic activities without disruption. So we are very proud of the fact that results got declared, the promotions happened, students got admitted in the new courses, the summer placements happened. And I think it was all because of the digital, leveraging the digital technologies. Without that, I don't think it would have been possible to complete that. So no disruption experience is, I think, something very important, which we benefited from this. And as you rightly pointed out, that some of these initiatives, if we had tried to implement in the normal times, it would have taken years to implement them. So we were forced in the COVID situation, and these got implemented. I think the other benefit which we got was that I think when we made this transition, I think there was a lot of discussion on the pedagogy and the way we deliver the lessons and the teaching to the students, what is their learning experience. I think this is the first time we got into the very minute details of the dynamics of various academic processes, which very closely connect the students and create the engagement process and help the students to learn. So from a very deep perspective, why through the discussions, because when we sat down that, okay, what are we missing, what we are missing in the digital classroom, so come we miss these kind of things, then we ask the question why they are important, then we'll have all the reasons are important, and then we say that how we can cover up them in the digital virtual classroom situation. So we were able to find out a lot of solutions, but a deep discussion on that. And I think I also second the point that was mentioned, that the compassion, empathy, and all those points were there because we started looking at everything from the student perspective, actually, that how he is facing it and how he is experiencing it, and so on and so forth. So various tools which were used, they have been very popular and effective, and everybody is enjoying them. Particularly Breakout Rooms is the big hit among the students when they in their learning process. Rooms, the smaller groups get made and they can interact virtually, and the professor can go and join any group during that process and participate in the discussions what the students are doing. Because for us that facility was very important. This Breakout Rooms is a very important facility because in a larger classroom there are many students who will not open up in the discussion, and therefore you do not get to know the wider perspective, what is being understood in the class kind of a situation. But once we break them in the smaller groups, I think many individuals open up and they start articulating their views, and it brings a lot of very important perspective in the discussion in the classroom kind of questions. Now, in the future, what we are looking for in this case is of course, we are soon going to get into the situation when some announcement about the opening up will happen. We may need to start the sessions in a blended form, so we are just now looking at that, how this blended approach will be implemented. I think there's a lot of discussion happening that our back-end staff needs a lot of orientation and a lot of training. So how do we go about in doing that? The faculty is now more enthused to go for the recording and doing their webinars and creating their podcasts. So we are soon going to have the training program for our faculty, how to create their own webcasts and podcasts and kind of a thing, because these are the kind of learning materials which the faculty can use in the asynchronous mode. I think what are the takeaways from all this experience? What has happened with us? I think reinventing the student experience in digital world needs careful thinking and strategizing. It's not something very easy way to go forward, but a lot of thinking is required. Of course, we started learning it by force and we had no options. But and I think the resilience and the agility of it is remarkable. But I think reinventing this student experience, particularly from the student's point of view, requires still a bit of thinking, because I feel we have not heard fully yet, and we made the complete impact actually, and we cannot say proudly today that we have replaced the classroom kind of situations with the digital mode. I think this is an unfinished task, and it requires a lot of thinking, a lot of reinventing, because we face a lot of challenges and the kind of loss we have in shifting to the virtual classrooms. How do we recover those losses? And also, I think the overall capacity strengthening of the people who are engaged in this process is also an important. The second takeaway is the digital shift focus and the student-centric processes and pedagogies they need to be thought through, and how do we address them? I'm sure that there are different solutions to address the different challenges. So we need to promote some kind of about the experiences, the difference of doing the things, and what is the key learning from that. And I think like the one you are perhaps doing is a step towards that, but there is a scope for doing a larger maybe roundtable, where I think some of the ways in which we have tried to come up with the new innovative solutions, they can be discussed and they can be thought through. I think we also, going forward, need to look at what are the new ways of measuring and evaluating the performance of the students. I think the initial approach to examinations through the digital mode has opened up some way forward, but I think it is still less understood area, and we cannot say that we have cracked this problem of evaluating the performance of the students in the digital world. It really requires a lot of thinking. It requires getting a lot of creativity on table to handle the student assessment issues in the process. The other, I think, takeaway is that we need to learn that how do we harness the synergies through the peer collaborations. Like I talked about the international business class by one of my faculty members, where 7 different experts from the different companies were brought in the course. I think those kind of initiatives and experiments we need to really look how to strengthen them, and how do we synergize them. And on developing the future courses, which is, I think, going to be a big challenge, that post-COVID situation, maybe our pedagogy, our course curriculum has to also make a dramatic shift actually to address the industry problems in a proper way. So for that development, for that insightfulness in these issues and challenges, we need a lot of collaboration across the business schools, across the experts, so that we can come up with the good courses and good curriculum which can address the future challenges the society is going to face. So back to you, Charlie. These were my words, actually.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Bhat, for wonderful insights. So if I can summarize or attempt to summarize, that is, so you spoke about both challenges and opportunities, and the challenges being that, how do we enable the safety of students, and how do we ensure that the loss that happens when we move from physical to online, how that is managed through innovative pedagogies. And I think one of the things which are, these are also things which are work in progress, as well as the part about the assessment of the students. So these continue to remain some problems to be solved. However, there are some benefits that you can see, that there are some opportunities which have opened up, and the ones which stood out to me was the fact that today geography is not a problem anymore, that the world is indeed a closer place, and we can actually involve faculty and experts from all parts of the world, and that really adds a lot of value to the students. And another very interesting thing for me is that this has given an opportunity for academics to actually revisit the student experience and how we actually make the education more relevant and acceptable to students. So that is one of the big benefits, perhaps, that everybody is coming back to the table. You suggested a round table, and everybody is now thinking from the student's point of view, which I think is a great indicator towards the quality of education that students will receive in the future. So thank you very much, Dr. Bhat, for joining and also spending more than the slotted time with us.
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for your time. Have a
Thank
good
you.
day. Bye.